Yes. Shh. Turn on the mic.
On, testing, 1, 2, 3. Purple people eater, purple people eater. Okay, good. Thanks everybody for coming over here, and this is my equivalent of a TED Talk. Okay, Pandering in a Panel by John P. The fact, oh wait, wrong button. The fact that in present time this magical medium has been degenerated to a level of cheap entertainment and manipulation is, I think, a tragedy. Alan Moore. The golden age of comics. When most people usually hear the word the golden age of comics, they usually think of Spider-Man swooping in to save the day, or Superman punching Hitler in the face. But in actuality, it was so much more than just flying superheroes in tights. There was a time where comic books displayed graphic epics, gruesome horror scenes, and raunchy romances. From the 1920s and 1940s, comics lived in their Wild West era, where themes of crime, sex, and violence could be discussed. That wasn't until the communism-filled 1950s, where they shot out this little stamp called the Comics Code Authority, which acted like a steel crowbar to the shins of the comic industry for years. Now, within the next few years, most action, horror, and romance were thrown out the window and replaced with superhero comics. Good? Okay. Replaced with superhero comics. Now, this was primarily used so that, as an excuse for the younger generation will be exposed to communism or the gays. But again, all that changed during the nerd rebellion of the 80s and 90s, where more engaging and mature writing was being made, with comics slowly but surely clawing their way to the limelight, with authors such as Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, and Frank Miller arguing that comics weren't just a source of entertainment, but art as well. But all that changed in the 2000s. Good Lord, the 2000s. With the 2000s to today, comics lived in their dark age, their fall from grace. Now, from what I can tell, I have, after spending an extensive amount of research and actually listening to countless interviews of professionals, such as Chuck Dixon, I found that there was one major fault that most modern comic book writers had, which was they failed to use the mask. The mask is one of the most important aspects of comic and all writing. Pretty much when you can take a character, any character that you write, and you can make the audience see them. You can, whether it be their flaws, their ideals, their goals, anything that they have, it makes you connect with them. It makes you think that they're like me. And once you get to that mindset, it is incredibly easy for you to be invested in these characters. But modern comics, they throw that out the window. They much rather actually appear morally good to the public rather than actually producing good or hell, even mediocre stories. Now it's time to talk about, isn't that weird, but okay. Time to talk about the elephant in the room, manga. Manga was introduced to Japan during the American occupation around the 1940s to 1950s. During this time, we introduced many things to Japanese people, including live-action movies, animation, and comics. And due to the heavy destruction of the bombings of Japan, which included places like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there wasn't any reliable way for entertainment for the Japanese people after World War II. Manga was one of the very few reliable entertainment platforms for Japanese people between the 50s and 60s, and they accepted it. And during the 1980s, when the cyberpunk movement hit its storm, and with manga such as Ghost in the Shell or Akira washed over the shelves, Japan had officially accepted all manga as cultural art form and needed for the Japanese culture to spread. Now, there are many differences in, manga and, American comics. Even though they're fundamentally the same, both are sequential static images. But manga has dominated the industry for decades. That has produced the question, why? Why are manga much more successful than comics? Or more specifically, what is so different about manga that makes it so much more successful than comics? And after further research, I found two reasons for that. These being the first is storytelling. Japan had lived in an isolated bubble for 1,000 years until the 1800s when Western powers forced their way into trade. During this time, they had time to develop a culture and system solely unique to their principles and beliefs. Now, this culture had bled their way into their art, with most of their paintings, plays, and performances dripping with a sense of cynical wonder. Whereas for manga, their version of that is called Kisho Tenketsu, which translates to Ki, introduction, Ten, development, Ken, the conclusion, Ken, the twist, and Ketsu, the conclusion. Whereas for more Western audiences, Western culture has been much more, well, goal-oriented, point A to point B. But so our writing system would be the three-act structure. Then, and as you can see by the, wrong button. Second point that I found was actually culturally. First, mostly because even though both of them were both made around the same thing, both manga and comics, and were made somewhat around the same time period, between the early 1900s, both of them have very drastically different views of their graphic novel counterparts. As mentioned before, manga had flourished and had been readily accepted in Japan. But in America, we had many adversities and distrust between comics, thinking that they would be a plight to our society, similar to how video games are today. So we distrusted it, we barred it, and only now are we just starting to accept it, that it could be art form. And you can definitely see between the sales over the past 40 years. These are the sales that from the entirety of the Western American comic book industry versus manga. And as you can see, it is drastically different. And now it brings the question, why should we care? Why should you care about the comic industry? Mainly because it's dying. With companies such as DC and Marvel, they're going bankrupt. When many people believe that they would actually go out of business, the comic industries will go out of business within the next few decades. And because they're producing so much shoddy work and they're losing so much money that they just might pull out of the comic race and solely focus on their films. And due to that, the entirety of the Western perspective and the three-act structure of comics will be lost with it. And that's why I spent all this time to create my own story, to use both the knowledge and themes of the three-act structure and Japanese manga to create my own story called Demon Shop, where to make the long short of it, it was about two paranormal investigators solving through mysteries and learning more about how the magical world that I created worked. And I actually forgot to put a conclusion slide, but that is my presentation. Thank you. Oh, right. Sorry. Thank you, Maddie. Any questions? Any questions at all? Yes, Mr. Dixon.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Demon Shop and your process and where that's at right now?
Right. Demon Shop I had created the general concept idea and actually the skeleton of the system earlier this year. But throughout the semester, throughout the semester, I had focused more on the musculatory system of the work, but slowly coming up with the storyboards and descriptions and plot and written dialogue of the story.